Hello! Welcome to Glastonbury Romance. The saga continues. As the two Deckers were turning into Silver Street, John Crow, playing truant with his little office by the station, was dawdling in front of the old men's almhouses and staring up at the bell cut of St. Margaret's 13th century chapel. It was part of John's deep selfishness, of this egotism which he deliberately and shamelessly cultivated, that he always preferred to allow his imagination to be stirred by little out-of-the-way buildings of this kind, rather than by more famous ancient erections. Ancient erections. The aura of visitors gathered for him round any notable show spot, and was enough to turn him against it. Okay. But a fragment of old wall, a broken piece of old coping, or, much more, a building like this that had retained its own humble, patient identity throughout so many generations, always held his imagination in a dreamy, heavy trance of curious felicity. As he now surveyed this old bell cot of St. Margaret's Chapel, out of whose stones grew intermittent stonecrop and green moss, the thought of how long this little tower, with its two bells and its statue of the saint, had been mingled with the thoughts of the generation of life-broken, life-weary, life-sated, life-hungry old men going in and out of the old men's almhouses, gave the selfish John a thrilling rapture of delight. Like a lovely wine, light and dreamy, made out of cold, old mosses, softer than sleep. Mosses, not Moses. I don't know why I pronounced it like that. This incorrigible and mischievous wanderer drank deep of these ancient men's long secular lives under St. Margaret's bell tower. He had drifted now to where a street road branched off to the west, and instead of walking on a hill head and crossing that strip of wasteland, which is the arena of Tom Chinnock's erotic activities, he turned down Street Road. He had in his mind a little dairy shop not far from Cardiff Villa, where the new Major lived. This meant a furtive and foxy shuffle for the misanthropic John along the other side of the road. It might indeed be said that the whole of John's Crow life was a subsequence of other sides. Get that next page. Other sides of roads. Other sides of thoughts. Other sides of ideas, religions, labors, activities, and the whole great, dusty, bustling panorama of life. It was the same thing, even when he held Mary in his arms, for he liked better to hold her as if he had caught her escaping from him, than as if she had rushed to meet him with outstretched arms. He pretended to be extremely interested in the small suburban gardens on his right as he advanced hurriedly and surreptitiously along the path. He was seized, however, with such a strong feeling of being waved at and called out to and summoned to stop for the single upper window, the window of Crummie's bedroom, visible between the tall bushes, that he raised one quick, nervous glance at that dark aperture. But though his fancy filled with that small space with the heads of the whole Gurd family, he knew in his mind that no one was there. And as he hurried on, trailing the point of his stick along the hedges, the gates, the railings, the walls of the other side of Street Road. At last he came to the little isolated dairy shop. It stood close to the road, this little shop, and he occupied the whole ground floor of a small square Jacobean house that made an odd contrast to the Victorian tradesmen villas that formed its neighborhood. The hot sun beat down on the front of this little establishment, where the grounds before the open door had been strewn with gravel. There were two wooden benches on either side of the entrance, and inside there were several little wooden tables. The spot had an old-fashioned mellow look, and yet the fact that milk in place of beer was a beverage sold gave a peculiar character to the whole place, which it would have been hard to define. John had discovered this innocent refuge several weeks ago, and it had grown to be a favorite treat of his though so far he had not revealed its whereabouts to Mary. The blending of Jacobean brickwork with warm, dusty sunshine, and both of these with large, cool, white receptacles full of milk. Oh, that sounds good, doesn't it? Made of Otheray's Creamery and Street Road an oasis of sensuous West County peace, for such as did not require the more biblical stimulation of alcohol to bathe them in enchantment. John walked in and ordered a pint of milk and a couple of cheese sandwiches. These he carried himself to a place at the back of the room, from whose cool, dark shelter he could see the hot sunshine outside, not so much lying upon as absorbing into itself the gravel, the wooden benches, the strip of road dust. Now, this is interesting because I was just reading about dairy bars or dairy restaurants in New York City, so I wonder if they're related to these milk bars. And then, of course, there's the Korova milk bar from Clockwork Orange, so I guess it's a British thing to have milk bars. We don't quite have those in the States. John had not settled himself for very long, enjoying the look of that shimmering picture framed so caressingly in the doorway, a picture whose only background was a tiny space of misty blue between two ramshackle sheds across the road, when he became aware of a stockily built young man with an open countenance correcting a piece of manuscript. The fingers which held this person's pencil were those of a manual laborer, but the face that alternately bent down and rose to stare into vacancy was that of a refined scholar. Panic seized the misanthropic John, and he thought to himself, "All is lost, all is spoilt." He began gobbling his sandwiches and gulping his milk, not groping his milk. "I'll clear out of here before he speaks. He's sure to speak if I stay. He's a born hailer of strangers." But the fair young man, who must have been about 10 years younger than John, showed no sign of speaking. He continued to stare alternately at his manuscript and at its space. John's mind worked in a most characteristic manner now. "My good meal has been spoiled, my good moment has been ruined. But in for a penny and in for a pound. I may as well take the plunge." "Are you a visitor of Glastonbury, sir?" he asked in a friendly tone. The young man did not seem surprised at such an address, nor did he seem to take it in ill part. He laid his glass of milk on the top of his manuscript to prevent the wind from ruffling it, and pulling his chair a little nearer John's table. "In a way I am, in a way I'm not. I'm Edward Alling from Middlezoy. I live at Haw Bottom Old Farm out there. But perhaps you are a stranger. It's nice on a day like this in Glastonbury, isn't it?" John, in his easily acquired manner of pageant advertiser, began at once talking about this new mayor and his scheme of a passion play. Edward Atling listened with extreme interest. "I believe I could help you over this, if you'd let me," he said. "I helped Mr. King with that Greylands pageant in which the headmaster played St. Adham." "We're negotiating," said John, "with 2 people from the Abbey Theatre in Dublin to come and do the directing for us. What we are in want of, though most of the affair will be just pantomime and dumb show, is a little fragment of libretto." "If that a poem you're writing, sir, may I ask? It looks like poetry from here." "Oh, there's poetry on this page." But the young man waved aside the topic of his immediate occupation. "I'd like uncommonly well," he said, "to try my hand at that bit of libretto for you. Is it about Arthur you'll want it?" So differently do events work out from them what we anticipate, that the evasive John, who had looked up his office and was looking forward to a couple of hours of solitary mystic sensuous enjoyment, now find himself confronted by a regular circus master's dilemma. Fear of losing a unique talent and fear of fatally committing himself to the untried. Ed Alling must have read his thoughts. "I know the kind of poetry you want," he said eagerly. "It must be easy to recite. It must be a bit rhetorical. It must be grandiose. But it must have a touch, a flavor, somewhere about it, of genuine magic." John experienced a shock of an extremely unpleasant kind when he heard these words. Deep in his sidelong, shifty, dodging, shearing off nature, there was lodged an invincible distaste for all artistic theories. He could recognize genius in the raw, but a certain particular expository tone made him feel as if this stomach was full of gray ashes. Ned Atling scrutinized this lean and comfortable person who was now occupied in making little bread pellets and the crumbs of his meal. With every trace of absent-mindedness gone, the young man had the wit to see that his last remark had made the mayor's secretary wince. He got up boldly, therefore, and brought both his manuscript and his chair over to John's table. I'm going to take the liberty of reading to you the poem I've just written. Its landscape is an imaginary one, like that of Kubla Khan. I've called it Merlin the Enchanter. 1 minute, if you don't mind, cried John, getting up himself and hurrying to the counter. Here he scrupulously and meticulously paid for his milk and cheese, prolonging this transaction all he could, and commenting in the ears of young Pet Othery, a dreamy maid with a pansy novelette always on her lap, on the reasonableness of the day's heat. John rushed to pay his bills at this moment because of the mingling to him of an unalloyed impulse to escape from this lad and an invincible dislike of hurting anyone's feelings. It was his private doctrine, based on constant experience, that if you could postpone a disagreeable event even by 3 minutes, the chances are in your favor of something intervening that might save you from it altogether. It's fair. Pet Othery, however, as she laid her novelette down on the counter between a great bowl of milk and a small bowl of Devonshire cream, closing a pair of scissors within it, and even her thimble and thread, so that her place should not be lost, began to address John in an excited whisper. "Do 'ee know, mister, who that gentleman by you's talking to? 'Tis Mr. Atling from Middlezoy, who everybody says be keeping company with Lady Rachel, the Marquis's only girl. Her father won't have none of 'em, so they say, though the Atlings be a good Somerset family. But Lady Rachel, from all accounts, do bide by her own choice, and small blame to her, I say." Hey, that wasn't so bad that time, right? Let's get it better. Having uttered her grand piece of communication, Miss Otherly picked up her novelette again and spread it out upon her lap. Her place was now proved to have been kept, not only by thimble and thread and scissors, but also by a bit of chocolate, done up in silver paper, which she had now proceeded to enjoy. The idea that Mr. Crow might prefer her conversation to that of Lady Rachel's young man never for a single second entered her romantic head. Ever afterwards, indeed, Pet Othery associated this particular volume, which he called Lizzie Upton's Temptation, with this encounter between the mayor's secretary and Lady Rachel's lover. John was compelled, therefore, to return to his little round china-top table, upon which, heedless to spilt milk, Edward Atling had spread out his poem. The Middlezoy poet read his lines in a little chanting sing-song that mounted up to a quite stirring climax by the end. Pet Othery's lifted her rounded chin from her sewing and from her story, and regarded him with eyes of soft and melting tenderness. The sunlight flooded the gravel outside the open door with such a warm, dusty glow that it gave to the interior of this little shop a dim, cloistral coolness that lent itself well to this occasion. And now I shall proceed to read this guy's poem, Ned Atling's poem. This wind has blown the sun out of this place. I look forward to the west, and lo, a vast, lost battle broken, bastion cover up, the natural sky. To what rain-rampered region of huge disaster, to these hills, toppling above each other, ridge on ridge, with trees that in the night are heaped like moss. With trees that darken into tapestries of vaporous moss, with roads that traveling through terraces of twilight loss, themselves in green-black tumuli of mystery, and piled up mounds of moss and mystery, led by soul through the silence, not a stone, but talks in muffled tongue to other stones. There's not a wild, wet-beaked, night-flying bird that does not scream upon this tossing wind to other darker burns, my cry, of rumors and of runes and reckonings, or rain-whirled storm wrack, rolls of malediction, and I, the enchanter, riding on these hills, and on the stage that tramp on these hills, and on the twilight, and on these heaped mounds of mystery, and on these wild birds and wings, death runes, death rumors, ruins and rains of death. And now, myself this wind, this wind, this wind, this wind that blows the sun out of his place. Thank you. Thank you. That was the poem. And that's Glastonbury for today. I hope you've had a good Mother's Day and are enjoying, what did John say before? The couple of hours of solitary, mystic, sensuous enjoyment. I know I have. Till next time, cheers.